Good.
Welcome back, everyone. Samuel returned from vacation, and we are diving into the world of DUSKMOURN House of Horror, a set that is a bit too early for Halloween, but still fits the theme, I would say.
Yeah, it tries to do the job of Halloween, but yeah, it also speaking of it being a bit too early, it feels like we just had a magic set and now we have another one. But I think that's been a constant trend of the last 3 years.
Yeah, that's usual business, I was just about to say. But yeah, here we are today again with a few new fancy cards the set will bring for us. And we are starting right away with also a new, not card type, but subtype, which is an enchantment room. We have Walk and Closet and Forgotten Cellar. A card that reminded me of Azusa in the very first beginning. Whenever you see something with lands printed on a card and it's green, then you probably think about Azusa. So just to remind everyone about how the rooms are functioning, you play either of the side, and then the side that you play is unlocked, and you can pay the mana of the other side to unlock that room as well. What do you think about this card?
Yeah, I think it's cool that they are entering. Well, this is an iteration on the design space of you for 15 years there was Crucible of Worlds and that was it, and then eventually there came Ramunap Excavator and then Conduit of Worlds, which is a similar card to this one where it lets you play spells from your graveyard as well. This one might be better, might be worse than Conduit of Worlds. It definitely allows decks like Azusa, and probably at the moment only Azusa, to have a good front side, and then the back side is going to be useful sometimes. But if you're paying 5 mana to flashback a spell, that's pretty expensive. Then again, when you've been playing all your lands from your graveyard, you probably have quite a lot of mana, so that's could work out well, could work out not so well. We'll have to see. It'll have to get tested.
But I think a 5 mana Yawgmoth's Will is welcome in a strategy like this. Yeah, we will see. It will we'll definitely see some play over there. And as you said, there was Crucible and there was the Conduit of Worlds. And apart from that, there was nothing in that direction. So I'm excited. It's also, artifacts are usually easier to deal with than enchantments because more spells are dealing with artifacts. And there's also a new spell from this set that has, for 2 mana, I think, changing target of a single spell or something, a single target of a spell, and it also destroys an artifact, but it rarely or almost never destroys an enchantment as well, which would be theme-wise and also utility-wise much better in this standard format, at least.
Yeah, I think red has a lot of ways to destroy artifacts and not a lot to destroy enchantments. That's the same. Black has a couple of ways to destroy enchantments and not artifacts. So there's a bit of a balance to it. I also think it's true that enchantments are more resilient overall than artifacts.
Yeah. Talking of red cards, Samuel, there is a new banger for all the Red Wins aficionados.
Screaming Nemesis.
Yes.
Hasty 3/3s. There was a time in Highlander or in Duel Commander where a 3/3 for 3 with haste was just about good enough to be played.
Yeah.
I remember there being an uncommon in Kaladesh that was like goblins that were they were gremlins, and they made it into the Highlander mono red deck. And now we have an incredible amount of upside on a card like this. So, being able to shoot damage back at an opponent means this card is very difficult to block. Also, you can chump block it, but it has upside if it gets chump blocked. and the can't gain life for the rest of the game text has been seen on other cards before, but this is the best version of that that we've seen so far.
Absolutely. So if you've seen the match Norin versus Aragon, which I recently played against Marcus, I brought this card to the table 2 times. The interesting thing about this card, in my opinion, is that you can shock this card, shock the creature, and then you redirect the damage to your opponent, and then you make use of the can't gain life aspect here as well. So you don't have to lose the creature in combat or by hoping that your opponent will bolt it or galvanic blast or whatsoever in any other way deal with the creature. So that's way, way better. If you think about how's the CMC2 called with Wither, that also says if it deals combat damage, creature players can't gain, or the player that was deal combat damage can't gain life for the rest of the game. Sigma Stitcher or something like this?
I think no, the Stigma Lasher.
Stigma Lasher, yeah. If you compare it to that, like you need to connect in order to make use of the static ability. In comparison to that, just shooting your own things onto the creature and redirecting the damage, that's such an insane upgrade. It's absolutely crazy, in my opinion.
The fact that you can shock this in response to removal, shock your opponent, and make him not be able to gain life for the rest of the game is very strong.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially in a metagame where you have to fight with Aragon. And apart from Aragon, I think there are not that many lifelink commanders running around. But you have a couple of creatures every now and then. For example, a Barrogoyf that lurks around the corner trying to...
Yeah. A Chaos Guile, a Scavenging Ooze, people cracking foods.
Yeah, right.
In all, most decks have a way to gain life, have at least one way to gain life, and it's also a very, very good card against Sheoldred, which relies a lot on that sort of life gain on the commander.
Absolutely, yeah.
Can stonewall your deck pretty hard, but if you manage to find a line where you can have this guy on the board and then deal damage with him to the opponent, you've not won the game, but you're pretty close to it.
Yeah, definitely. And that's one big advantage of Sheoldred as an NPC commander, that you finally have a commander that grants some life against red deck wins, because that was usually, when I look back at the times when you played Tevesh Miara and other things, that was always a bit of a downside against the red strategy, that there's just so much life gain in order to barely survive the matchup until you take the lead, which usually takes much longer with the NPC strategy. So if you take that away from Sheoldred, I think it gives you a good perspective for those matchups in which you manage to draw the Nemesis. Okay, over to another. That's the third mythic rare in a row, I just realized. It's the Abhorrent Oculus. So the biggest eye ever printed on a card, something like this. 3 mana 5/5. With flying, you need to exile a couple of cards in addition to cast that card. And you have a beginning of opponent's upkeep trigger. At first I saw this card, I was like, I don't know. Then How was texting me and he said like, have a look at this. Is comparable to Murktide. I was like, yeah, you're right, but I'm not sure about it because I told that to Samuel also prior to the podcast. Most of the time, I'm a bit hesitating whether or not I should include Murktide or not. And if Murktide is already a bit of the Wackelkandidat, as you would say in German, then this card would probably not fit into any deck. But it also depends on the strategy. This might find its way into a Tavia, for example, or maybe even some of the newer commanders. You played the Frog recently. Marcus is also tinkering with the deck. If you have a lot of graveyard fuel and you can just afford to cast a cheap, big threat, and the additional cost is not really that much of a big deal for you, maybe this card fits into your pile. The triggered ability is actually quite good, I think.
Yep.
producing more creatures that could turn into bigger creatures depending on what you flip. And it also fuels your graveyard, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is one of the long line of cards that Wizards is trying to figure out how powerful can a 3-drop be. We've had cards like Rotting Regisaur, where there is a downside to it, but you have a 7/6 body on the board. The green 3-drops used to be Leatherback Baloth, I think is what it's called. It used to be a 4/5 for 3 green mana, and that trend has only gone up in the last couple of sets and additions to that kind of cycle. And this is another card that, this is a powerful 3-drop, lots of stats, another ability that has an upside, and only the casting cost for this is a downside.
Yep.
True. If people are still playing Octavia, this is probably a card that slots into that deck pretty well, since you probably a lot of the time have a couple of creatures and a couple of lands in the graveyard that you can exile, and that don't really worry Octavia. Coming back to the first comment you made, the biggest eye that you've seen printed on a creature that would offend a friend of mine whose favorite card is Evil Eye of Ormsby Gore. It's a very old card.
I'm not even sure if I know this card.
That also has a very big very big card, a big eye. Yeah. And I think there's a couple of other other cards with big eyes.
Yeah. There's also Evil Eye of Urborg. I see it. Now I see it.
So this is. I don't think this is on top of the list of big eyes, but it's probably on top of the list of powerful 3-drops in blue, or powerful 3-drop creatures in blue. It's not quite as good as True Name Nemesis, but if it isn't killed immediately, you're going to end up with 7 power initially for 3 mana, which is pretty strong.
Yeah, and the fact that it triggers in your opponent's upkeep, I mean, it doesn't do something on ETB, but it pseudos does something in your turn because it's your opponent's upkeep. So you can pass the turn. You don't have to wait a full turn until you untap again, and then there is a trigger. So it's. I think it's interesting.
If the opponent is tapped out, that's the triggers on the stack when they first have priority, even with an instant speed spell. So
right.
Yeah, you are getting that 2/2 if you get it past your end step.
True. Okay, we talked about the Screaming Nemesis as an upgrade for Red Deck wins, but we also have Norin, which is a completely new command zone for that. If you're curious about Norin, we've done a whole series regarding him. I think it's a dude, and you can go over there. And check out the matchups. We've played against Glarb, we've played against Slimefoot and Aragon. It's a new legendary 1-drop in the command zone. As we've seen in the past, that's always, or seems to be, the people seems to be scared of 1-drops for Red Deck wins. Of course, this is not up to Ragavan's level, and I'm not yet sure if it's up to Zergo's level, but I think the second ability is much, much better than people would think, because you can abuse ETB effects with that. There are not too many powerful ETB effects, but you can also prevent your opponents from gaining life through blocking by exiling the blocked creature. So this has some room to be used. I'm just curious how this card will change Red Deck wins, because I currently think Felden seems to be a bit stuck with the current contenders, and this one could bring some fresh air into the game. What do you think?
Yeah, as a non-Red Deck wins player, I feel like this is an interesting balance between quite a few different aspects. So doesn't have haste, that's good. Can't block, isn't very relevant, but might sometimes be relevant. The fact that it has 1 toughness and gets killed by a bunch of things is good for the meta, I think. Not good for the card, but good for the meta.
Yeah.
And I also think that the second ability creates some interesting deck building
Yes.
considerations.
Definitely.
Because if you want to be relying on your commander, it makes creatures with haste worse. Because what you want to be doing with this guy is untapping and attacking with your creatures, so that if the opponent has lethal blocks, you can just recast your creatures after they get blocked. But if you have a creature with haste, you're going to have spent that mana by the time. If you want to attack with a creature, play it pre-combat, then you don't have the mana to recast it. So there's an interesting dynamic there. Then again, you don't have to use his ability. You can just play as you used to play red deck wins, and then you just have a 1-drop every time, which also changes the decks quite a bit, because if you have a 1-drop every turn, every game, I mean, you can cut a lot of the bad 1-drops, maybe just to keep a couple of the good ones, and play more spells, play more bigger creatures, maybe even play more lands in order to accommodate for playing more spells and more bigger creatures.
Yeah.
So that changes. So I think it's probably going to be a pretty big difference in the lists, where I think the difference between Kari and Felden isn't that big. I would expect the difference between a Norin list and those two decks to be pretty big.
Absolutely. It's completely different. Dynamics are completely different. Card choices. This one tends to be, as you said, you cut all the bad 1-drops. You just play the good ones, so you have more space for spells. So this one goes more in a burn direction, and then you add the good creature drops that are not good for themselves, but also might synergize with the triggered ability. So it makes for a very interesting red brew, in my opinion. And I'm curious where that goes. And as you said, 1 toughness can be dealt with by Orcish Bowmasters. You can decide to block that with your Dork if you want, as a Slamfoot player or something like this. So yeah, it's good in a way that it's fragile enough to be dealt with. Let's say it like this.
Yep.
Okay. Then there is a new Dimir legendary. It seems that Wizards is on the 2-mana Dimir road again. We had Lazav, a new Lazav variant. We had Bazim, which Samuel played in the last Focus series. And now we have Nashi.
I'm reading the card for the first time now.
Okay. I think it's quite interesting. I've already done some scryfalling on it. You have a couple of enchantments that you can return with that. Most people might think about Bitter Blossom at first, depending on the strategy. But obviously you can also go for Reanimator enchantments in combination with milling some targets in an ideal world. You could also go for things like curiosities. There are various curiosities. And then also the legendary cards could be creatures, could be lands, whatsoever. So yeah, I think this card is cool. I will definitely experiment with it. Not yet sure whether or not to play or to include Reanimator lines or just go for a value tempo deck. Not yet sure about that.
Yeah, looking at it, I think it's probably worth experimenting with, like it was worth experimenting with Basim.
Yeah.
But I might be, having a foregone conclusion here. It seems not that strong, especially because, you're only milling 2 cards. So your selection isn't very high initially. And black and blue both don't play very many enchantments when they can avoid them. Blue plays a couple as removal spells, but if you play black, then you have better removal spells in black than the enchantments that you have in blue. So in order for this deck to make sense, in my opinion, you would have to be playing Reanimator, because then you've got 3 reanimation enchantments that you can flip with it, and a couple of other cards that and legendaries that deserve to be reanimated. But then again, you can't play Tivit, so you'd be playing Gristlebrand, and a couple of demons. I think this is, if you manage to make a deck like that work, I'd be impressed.
Okay. I don't say challenge accepted, because I'm usually not a Reanimator player, but We will see. We will see where we go.
Yeah.
I would be fine with just getting back a Seal of Removal from my graveyard, for example, as a soft start.
Yeah.
I think this has some interesting cards to play with. Next up, we have the Undead Sprinter, which is not the wow card, but I think it's a cool card in regards to the fact that, at least to me, it feels like we have a couple of cards in, or a couple of commanders in the metagame that act around sacrificing creatures or go in a Yuri Rakdos-ish direction. And this card fits those strategies quite good, I think. And also because, like, whenever you can make sure that creatures leave the battlefield, this one seems to be a unlimited resource against control decks, because you can always recast it, just with the restriction that the card that left the battlefield has to be a non-zombie. And it gets bigger and bigger, or it only gets bigger once, and then it's a 3/3 for 2 mana. Okay. But yeah, I think this card could be played in Grenzo, it could be played in Yuri. There's the new, how was the card called? The Lizard? Gelf? Glef?
Yep.
Gelf? Yeah. So I think we might see this card in a couple of lists.
I think you might even be underestimating a little bit, because it triggers for your opponent's creatures too. So you can kill an opponent's whatever and attack with this out of the graveyard. So this is a bit more universally, and if you can do that, killing opponent's creatures is what you want to be doing before combat, and so this fits pretty well into that, I think. Then again, there aren't that many aggro lists around, or that really go aggro, and that would be the use for it in an aggro list. But in a Yuri or in the Lizard, or whatever gets printed in the future, I think there's a lot of potential, maybe for something like a Mardu aggro list or something along those lines. This could find a home, and a 2/2 trample body isn't that great, but a 3/3 trample body can get a lot done. So I think this seems like a strong card in decks that have a strong commander that supports that game plan.
Right. Okay. Next up, we have Marvin, another card that you might like, because Samuel is kind of annoyed by the fact that Wizards is giving normal names to Magic cards because they run out of extraordinary names. And now you have cards called Falco. You have like a bird commander in banned colors that's called Falco. And everyone else thinks of the singer, I guess he is, right? Or was?
What was there was a 3 mana guy that I think you played, the Bant guy.
Rigo was the band guy I played.
I think that was the one. Yeah, I think that
and then there was also Oscar. There was also Oscar.
Yeah, there was Oscar.
The Delph, not the Delph guy, but cost reduction based on card types in graveyard, something like this.
Yeah.
Here we are with.
There were a lot of names in Streets of New Competitor that didn't really feel that magic-y, but this is another version of this. But I think this card is memorable enough as it is to not fall into that category for me.
Definitely. It's an interesting one. At first, when I saw it, I thought there must be a way to abuse it. And then if you dive into it a bit more and have a couple of thoughts on it, you realize, the cards are already on the battlefield, so you could probably, unless you want to copy the exact ability twice and by then can start to make some shenanigans with it, it's probably not too crazy. But still, I think this is, or the best home for this card could be Oswald, just copying Oswald's ability and then having 2 pot creatures on the battlefield while being an artifact creature itself, or an artifact, so you can search it with the initial pot activation of Oswald. Apart from that, I still think there could be something hiding somewhere that could be done.
There
with
are
the card.
combos with this card, But the issue is, how do I say this? This is Necrotic Ooze, 4 cards on the battlefield. So Necrotic Ooze combos are things like Devoted Druid, and there's a card that removes 2 -1/-1 counters as an activated ability, so you can make infinite mana with that. Or if you have something like Triskelion and Phyrexian, what is it, Dreadnought? Phyrexian Devourer, that's
Devourer,
the one.
yeah.
So with this card, you could have Triskelion and Phyrexian Devourer on the battlefield. The issue is, how do you get that? That's 14 CMC worth of cards that you are trying to put on the battlefield. There are better ways to win the game than that. So I'm not sure if there's any like very powerful combos with this, but I think I do agree, being in a deck that has value around those sorts of things, where you have activated abilities that are strong on their own and that are good to copy, even without a combo, is probably the way to go with this guy, unless something gets printed. This might slot into something Devoted Druid-y, but I think there's already enough combos with just Devoted Druid himself that,
True.
This doesn't make much sense with that.
We will see. I'm curious about that one. I also like the artwork. I also like the alternate artwork. Most of the alternate artworks are not really my kind of style, but others might favor them more. I think this one is also pretty cool. But let's see.
Yeah, I think it's a card with a lot of flavor. It has a very unique ability, and maybe in 5 years there'll be an incredibly powerful combo that goes along with it. There isn't one.
Yeah.
I don't think there is one right now.
Yep, fair enough. Okay, then let's get over to some kind of an honorable mention, which is the new 5, or it's not a full cycle, it's a half cycle of the somewhat upgraded check lands, if you so will. So those are not check lands. I don't know if there's a common term available yet, but they somewhat remind me of the Nimbus Maze, which says it deals colorless by default, and if you control an island, you can make a white mana. If you control a plains, you can make a blue mana. So this goes in a similar direction.
Also seems sort of like the Tainted Lands.
The Tainted Lands, right. The Tainted Lands, yeah.
The 4 lands that produce black mana, and if you control the swamp, they'll produce another color.
True.
Yeah, one other color.
So I really hope that, on one hand, I don't like the fact that Wizards is constantly bringing newer, better lands, and that the land base is changing that fast. If you think about it, and we talked about this a couple of times on camera and elsewhere, that the triomes were omnipresent in most decks, and all of a sudden there are the surveillance, and you don't see any triomes anymore. And like the landscape of your mana base is changing very quickly, because all over again there are newer, better lands, and it bothers me. At the same time, it makes our games much smoother, and it improves the play experience after all.
Yeah, I think surveillance have been a very interesting addition to the game, and I mean, we are, as we see with lots of cards that are being printed nowadays, that would be like rares that would be mythics if they were printed 10 years ago, and very similar things happening all over. Cards are getting more powerful. It's gradual, but if you look at any of the decks that win tournaments, you're going to have a high percentage of cards that are new, and I think that's what Wizards is going for, and that's why every set they have to bring out new lands, and the design space is not that big anymore, because they've printed a lot of variations of a land that makes 2 colors of mana. This is a pretty convoluted type, and I mean, I think that's just how the game is, and how it's going to have to be for the game to continue to grow and continue evolve and make money for Wizards, right?
And so, also that, yeah. True. Okay. Let's go over to a card from the Commander set, which is called Metamorphosis Fanatic. And it not only brings back Miracle, I think there are a couple of more Miracle cards printed in the Commander set, but also is this card a perfect print for Aminato Reanimator.
Yep.
Because you have a body that you can play for 2 mana. Guess what? With the +1 of Aminato, you can manipulate this card on top of your library, so you can force the miracle or control the miracle. And then you have a 4/4 lifelink body with an ETB that reanimates a creature, and you can flicker this with the -1 to bring back another creature. So it's a perfect print for this deck. When I saw the card, I was going completely nuts. If you were searching for a reason to play this deck, although it might not be tier 1 currently, here you go. That's it.
Yep.
Absolutely crazy.
Another important thing to mention with cards with Miracle is if you can draw a card at instant speed, you can Miracle things at instant speed.
Also that, yeah.
So if you play Aminato without pressure on the opponent's board, turn 3, turn 2 you've set up a body in the graveyard, you can then... Actually, wait. If you haven't done anything, you play Aminato, and then the next turn, and then for 4 mana, you plus Aminato once, put the Metamorphosis Fanatic onto your library, and then you play a Tainted Indulgence, or...
For example, yeah. Or Faithful Mending or something.
Faithful Mending.
Yeah.
You can then even discard the threat to the Faithful Mending or the Tainted Indulgence, and then play your Fanatic, cast it, and reanimate.
Is it like this? Is it like a miracle trigger that goes on a stack and you resolve the spell first and then you cast it? Yeah,
well,
like then
because
you
you're drawing a card mid-spell, I don't think
then
there's
it's okay.
any way to cast a spell while
other
while
spell
another
is still
spell
being
is
resolved.
still resolving.
Yeah,
so
yeah, right.
The cards will be in your graveyard that you discard, and then it's still the first card that you've drawn that turn if you do it in the opponent's turn. Also works with Frantic Search, so that's a very powerful line that you can ambush opponents with.
Definitely. And one minor detail that I almost forgot is the creature also gets a lifelink counter. Not that it's too relevant, but even something on top of that. So really, really good card. I was pretty impressed. And yeah, we will see it in Aminato. I'm 100% certain. Last but not least, we close this review with another room. Actually, we're trying to unlock rooms and not closing them, but maybe that kind of fits the topic. So we have the Roaring Furnace and the Steaming Sauna, which is not crazy good, but I think it's interesting enough to be played in a more controlish variant. So the left side says you deal damage equal to the number of cards in your hand to target creature not opponent controls. For 2 mana, I think that's the mode that will be played most often. And then for the later game, you have the right side, which says no maximum hand side, and at the beginning of your end step, you draw a card. 5 mana is costly, and you can only unlock it sorcery speed, okay, but still, you can use your mana in some way later this game. I think this is a card that's fine. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting card because it's a very bad top deck in the late game. Playing it for 2 mana if your hand is already empty is pretty shit, and then having to play another 5 to unlock it. But or actually, does it trigger again when you cast the Steaming Sauna? No.
No.
Right?
The left side is unlocked.
Is a door, and you unlock it as it enters the battlefield.
You decided to play the left side, so it will be unlocked when it enters, and then the ability triggers.
Yeah. So then again, it's a blue card that pitches to forces.
Free spells. Yes, most important.
well, yeah. I mean, it's a red removal spell that does pitch for your forces. I think that this is an interesting card. It's there used to be a Rowan Kenrith deck that I think it did won a couple of tournaments. We had a couple of people
Yeah.
try it out and try to make something work with it. This would have been a great card in that deck.
Definitely.
And
that's the first thing that comes in mind when you see this card. It's an Izzet control deck.
Yeah, it's an Izzet control deck, and Izzet control or Izzet decks have been sort of going more towards the aggro side. So if and when a commander is printed that facilitates a good Izzet control deck, this deck is probably going to find a home in. This card is probably going to find a home in that deck, especially because I think the draw at end step is pretty good, is pretty strong, and as opposed to draw and upkeep, because if the opponent just waits for you to open the room, and at least you haven't gotten two for one if they're planning to destroy the enchantment in their turn. Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah, I think we might see it here and there. As you said, Izzet control is currently not very well represented by any
commander. Does this card, if Niv Mizzet flips it, does Niv Mizzet get to keep this?
I'm not sure. Could be the case. I would think so, yes. Because it has both.
I think so too. Yeah, it has both colors.
Should be similar to the double-sided spells, right? Like Fire and Ice and all these things.
If Fire and Ice works, this card works as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we will see.
Okay.
I also thought about Niv Mizzet to be a home for that. We will see. Definitely interesting.
Yep.
Okay. So we're already at the end of our review for the DUSKMOURN set. I think we picked some cool cards this time. I'm not as hyped as I was with Bloomburrow, but still I think there are a couple of cool cards that are waiting for us to be played. I am personally in the waiting queue for Aminatu, simply because of the Fanatic. I think it's a very good reason to play the deck. And I've been collecting pieces all over again for the deck, and I've never picked it up because I had something else to play. No, I think now it's time. So we'll see.
Yeah. I'm very happy to see another set. I think I said this for the Bloomburrow set as well. I'm always more happy to see sets in the Magic universe than in other universes. And I think this is another pretty cool set that expands the Magic universe, and I think this is the way forward for Magic. But yeah, that's just me.
Okay. With that being said,
thank you for watching, and see you next time.
See you or hear you. You hear us. We probably don't hear you, but yeah, you will hear from us next time for sure.
Bye-bye.